There is a moment on every empty highway, just after dusk, when the headlights carve a tunnel through absolute blackness, and the world outside the windshield becomes a dream. That's when you see the thumb. A single figure on the shoulder, arm extended, face half lit by your high beams. We've all felt that quick pulse of pity, that human urge to slow down and help. But the three people in tonight's stories will tell you that some hitchhikers aren't lost travelers. They're predators who use our compassion as a door, an invitation into our cars, our memories, and our very lives. Drayton Keel picked up a man who knew his body better than he knew his own. Tamsin Furlow saw the same young woman on Route 79 for 8 years, always wearing the same smile, always asking for the same ride. And Orlyn Pate followed a stranded stranger into the woods and found a house full of drivers who had all made the same mistake. These are not campfire tales. They are warnings. So before you reach for that passenger door handle tonight, remember, not every traveler needs a lift. Some are just waiting for you to stop. My name is Drayton Keel. I'm a traveling medical equipment technician out of Lawton, Oklahoma, and I've driven more empty two-lane roads across the Great Plains than I've driven city streets. So when I saw a man standing on the shoulder of Highway 183 just south of Coldwater, Kansas, with his thumb stuck out and his denim jacket soaked from a sudden September rain, I didn't think twice about pulling my van onto the gravel and unlocking the door. He climbed in with a quiet nod, a lean white man about my age, late 30s, with thinning sandy hair and a week's worth of stubble, and he settled into the passenger seat with a long, tired sigh and said, "Thanks, Drayton. I knew you'd stop." I didn't register the name right then because I figured he'd seen it on my work badge clipped to the visor, but as I pulled back onto the highway, I asked him where he was headed, and he said, "Same place you are, up to Kearney for the St. Luke's delivery. But we'll stop at the Sinclair in Phillipsburg first. You always need coffee and a bathroom break around midnight." The Sinclair in Phillipsburg, I do stop there every single trip, but I'd never mentioned it aloud, had no route map visible. And when I glanced at him, he was looking at me not with a stranger's curiosity, but with a kind of tired fondness, the way an old friend looks at you after years apart. And his right hand rested on his knee, with the thumb bent at a familiar, crooked angle that made my own thumb ache in sympathy. I asked him his name, and he said, "You can call me Ellis. It's as good as any. But you already know me, Drayton. We've been on this road together since the day you passed your driving test." A cold, crawling sensation began to spread across my scalp, and I kept my eyes on the road, trying to laugh it off. But then he started talking about my childhood, the exact model of my first bike, the color of my mother's kitchen curtains, the name of the dog I'd had when I was 7, details I'd never shared with anyone. And he spoke in my own voice, not an impression but a perfect copy, the same Oklahoma drawl, the same slight stammer on words that started with R, and I realized I had pulled onto the shoulder without thinking. My knuckles white on the wheel, and I was staring at him as he calmly unbuttoned his denim jacket and showed me his left arm, which bore a long, jagged scar identical to mine, a scar I'd gotten from a broken bottle at a college party in 2008. He said, "I've got all your marks, Drayton. Every scar, every freckle, every filling in your teeth, because I've been riding shotgun inside your head for 20 years, waiting for the night you'd finally see me with your own eyes, and now that you have, we can finish the drive together." I don't remember throwing him out, but I remember the sudden cold of the open door, the rain on my face. I quit the job, moved to a different state, I haven't driven a two-lane highway at night since. But last week I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper, written in my own handwriting, that said, "I'm still in the passenger seat, Drayton. Even when you're alone, I'm always there. I'm waiting for you to pick me up again." Tamsin Furlow. I'm a retired school teacher from Morgantown, West Virginia, and I used to drive the back roads of Preston County every autumn to visit my sister in Terra Alta, a winding, lonely route along the Cheat River where the trees close in and the fog rolls off the water like breath. And it was on Route 79 in October of 2018 that I first saw the girl, a young woman of maybe 20 with long dark hair plastered to her cheeks and a soaked sundress. Standing on the shoulder with her thumb out and a small, patient smile on her face, even though the rain was coming down in sheets. I am not the kind of woman who picks up hitchhikers, never have been, but something about the way she met my eyes as I passed calm, expectant, almost amused, made me slow down, and I pulled over 50 feet ahead of her and waited. But she didn't move, didn't walk toward the car, just stood there smiling, and after a full minute I drove on. My heart beating faster than I wanted to admit. The second time I saw her, exactly 1 year later, same road, same month, same bend in the river. I was certain it was a different girl in the same dress until I noticed the same pale scar on her left knee, the same loose button on the collar, and the same smile, unchanged, as if she'd been waiting on that shoulder for 365 days, patient as stone. I didn't slow down that time, but I watched her in my rearview mirror. And she turned her head to follow my car, still smiling, and her lips moved. And I could have sworn she mouthed the word October, the month we always met, as if she was marking a calendar I couldn't see. The third year, in October of 2020, I was driving with my husband Gerald, and I told him about the girl. And he laughed and said it was local kids playing a prank. But when we rounded the bend and the headlights hit the shoulder, there she was, and Gerald fell silent because the girl was still 20 years old. Still wearing the same sundress, still smiling, but now her hair was dry despite the pouring rain. The rain itself seemed to curve around her body, leaving a dry halo on the wet asphalt. We sped past, and this time the car's radio flickered. And a voice, a young woman's voice, soft and dry, came through the static and said, "You've passed me 3 times now, Tamsin, but we both know you'll stop eventually. Everyone stops eventually, and I'll still be here. The same age, the same smile. Waiting for the night you finally pull over and let me in." I stopped driving Route 79 after that. Took the longer interstate route even though Gerald said I was being silly, and for 4 years I didn't see her. But last October, on a damp, cold night, I was driving home from a friend's house on a different road entirely. A little county lane I'd never taken before, and my headlights caught a figure on the shoulder. And it was her, the same girl, the same dress, the same smile. But now she was standing directly in front of my driveway, as if she knew where I lived, as if she'd gotten tired of waiting on the highway and decided to come closer. She didn't move as I pulled into the garage, didn't walk toward me. She stood there with the rain falling around her and that patient, knowing smile. And I locked every door in the house and closed every curtain. But when I looked out the bedroom window at midnight, she was still there. And I understood with a cold, final clarity that she would be there every October for the rest of my life in 1 year. When I was too old or too tired or too curious to resist, I would walk outside and take her hand, and the smile would widen, and we would finally take that ride together. Orlyn, Pate. I'm a field biologist based in Flagstaff, Arizona. And in the summer of 2025, I was driving back from a research trip in the Mojave Desert on a stretch of Route 66 that tourists have long abandoned, when I saw a man in a dusty flannel shirt and jeans stumbling along the shoulder with a red gas can in his hand, waving weakly at my approaching truck, and I pulled over because out there in that heat you stop, you help. It's an unwritten law of the desert. He was a gaunt, sunburned man, probably in his 40s, with cracked lips and pale blue eyes that didn't seem to blink. And he said his name was Len. That his car had died about 2 miles up a dirt road that branched off the highway, and he just needed a ride to his camp where he had a spare can of fuel, and I said sure, I'd take him. He directed me off the highway onto a rutted sandy track that wound through creosote and mesquite for much longer than 2 miles, and when I mentioned the distance, he just smiled and said, "It's a little farther than I remembered. But I promise, Orlyn, it'll be worth it." And I felt a chill at the use of my name, which I hadn't told him. But I'd been working with my field crew and had a name badge clipped to my pack, so I told myself that was it. That and the heat, and the long drive, and the lizard brain paranoia that the empty desert always breeds. The track ended at a hollow of dry earth where a house stood, a low, rambling adobe structure with a tin roof and a porch that sagged in the middle. And Len said, "The fuel's inside, come on in. I'll introduce you to everyone." And I froze because I hadn't seen any signs of other people. No other vehicles, no tents, no smoke, just the house and the silence and the endless blue sky. Inside, the house was dim and cool. And sitting on chairs and couches and even on the floor were at least 15 people, all dressed in mismatched, faded clothes, all with the same sunburned, gaunt look as Len, and every single one of them turned to look at me with pale blue eyes that didn't blink. And they smiled, and Len said, "These are all the drivers who stopped for me. Orlyn, they've been here for years, some of them since the 1960s. They're all very happy to meet you." I backed toward the door. But a woman with long gray hair and a smile that cracked her dry lips stood up and said, "Don't be afraid, honey." We all felt the same way when we first arrived, but Len is so generous, he lets us stay forever, and we never have to leave. We just sit and talk about the roads we used to drive and the places we meant to go. And after a while you forget what it felt like to be behind the wheel, and that's when the real peace begins. I saw then that the people's hands were resting on their laps, empty, none of them holding anything, and their legs were still, too still, as if they hadn't moved in years, and the dust on their clothes was thick and uniform, not just desert dust, but a gray, settled layer that suggested decades of stillness. And I realized they were not hostages, they were shells, hollowed out, their bodies present, but their consciousnesses somewhere else. Somewhere far away, leaving behind only the smiles and the unblinking eyes and the patient, terrible welcome. I bolted out the door, and Len didn't chase me, just called after me in a voice that was almost sad, "You'll be back, Orlyn. The road always brings you back. It's just a matter of time." And I drove my truck out of that hollow so fast, the dust plume must have been visible for miles. I got back to Flagstaff, and I didn't tell anyone, 'cause who would believe me? But I looked up missing persons records and found 17 reports from that stretch of Route 66, going back to 1961. All drivers who vanished on long desert trips, and their photos matched the faces I'd seen in that house, unchanged, still wearing the same clothes they'd disappeared in, still smiling that same dead smile. I've since moved to a city far from the desert, But sometimes when I close my eyes, I see Len standing on a different road, with a different car pulling over, and a new driver asking how far the walk is. And Len saying, not far at all, and there's a whole family waiting to meet you. The shoulder of a lonely road is a threshold, a place where the world you know ends and something else begins. Drayton, Tamsin, and Orlyn each crossed that threshold. Each opened their car door to a stranger who was never just a stranger. And each paid for that compassion with a piece of their peace. These three accounts are not meant to make you fear the open road, but to remind you that the most terrifying things we can encounter rarely announce themselves with fangs or claws. They smile, they wave, they hold out a thumb and wait for our better nature to let them in. If you've ever picked up a hitchhiker, or even thought about it, I hope tonight's stories have given you something to think about. I'm your host from True Terraphiles, and if this video resonated with you, please share your own roadside experiences in the comments. You might help someone make a different choice next time. Subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss next Wednesday's collection of slow burn American horror. Until then, keep your doors locked, your eyes on the road, and never ever stop for a smile you don't recognize.